This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Look, I keep trying to take a week off, but the news just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Absolutely massive show for you this week, including what is going on with Donald Trump and his cabinet. Has he appointed anyone who isn't alleged of criminal activity? We'll find out after this. Also, Albo and China. Are they friends or are they frenemies? Or are they just plain enemies? And what's going on with Albo and Donald Trump? We'll get to the bottom of that as well. All that and more coming up. So first up this week, I want to take you into the incredible hive mind of Donald Trump, his first buddy Elon Musk, and the permatanned RFK Jr., and why they're all eating McDonald's on the Trump jet, and what is going on with Donald Trump's cabinet picks. Everyone is absolutely up in arms about some of the selections. Some are pretty normal. Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Okay, looks like Ukraine might survive a while longer. He's sane. He's a Republican. He's conservative, obviously, but he's sane. Donald Trump, I think, once accused him of having a small appendage, but they seem to have put that behind them. Shaking hands. I think they've both agreed now that they've got good, normal, manly-sized hands. Just American political debate just never fails to amaze me. But Donald Trump is doing something, and it's hard to know whether Trump even knows that he's doing it, but he's doing this classic kind of rule of three move. And everything Donald Trump does is show business. Okay, that is the most important thing to remember. And the rule of three is a classic rule of showbiz. It's a rule of comedy. It's basically the Englishman, the Irishman, the Scotsman, right? You introduce a scenario first up, then your second player then confirms that scenario, and that sets up the audience's expectations for the third thing. And then, of course, it's something else, and that's the punchline. And it's known among comedians and social historians or whoever actually comes up or thinks about these things as the rule of three. And Donald Trump has played a classic rule of three on the whole world. And this is the amazing thing about him. Like, if you look at the cabinet that he is assembling, and none of these people have been confirmed yet, and that's another story, whether or not he even needs the Senate to confirm them. Normally the president puts forward the nomination, the Senate then has to rubber stamp them, and Donald Trump has the numbers in the Senate, but of course the Republicans are a little bit divided. They don't have a binding caucus, and so they might not actually go with some of his crazier picks. Then there is another clause that Donald Trump has where he could just make them the position he wants to make them by declaring the Senate in recess, saying, oh, I would have got approval from the Senate, but the Senate's not sitting, so there's this little clause in the Constitution or wherever it is that says I can just do it anyway. Whatever. All that is kind of immaterial. The point is, this is the show that Donald Trump is putting on. Think of a giant reality TV show where you get half a dozen people, let's say. Let's get a cast of a dozen. Like think Love Island, right? You got a cast of a dozen people, and the casting is the most important thing in any reality TV show. So you've got to make sure they're all crazy, or they're malevolent, or they're dastardly, or they're wicked, or they're sly, or they're fiendish, or just plain nuts. But they can't all just be nuts or sly or evil in the same way. They've all got to be crazy in a different way. You know, you've got to have a crazy genius and a crazy idiot. And you assemble all these people together. And of course, in a reality TV show in Australia, they'd all just end up having sex with each other. But in Donald Trump's reality TV show, they get given the task of running the world. It's amazing. And it's not even a reality TV. It's a live show. It is happening, and it is being live streamed on every single news network in the country. And of course, everyone is losing their minds. Now, let's just get to the most contentious picks, the picks that everybody is talking about. And how many are there? That's right, 3. Always the rule of 3, the holy trinity, the trifecta. And again, it's hard to know if Trump even knows that he's doing this, or if he's just got this incredible instinct for showmanship, or this instinct for comedy. So he's dangling these 3 people. And again, what does he do first? First up, he appoints a Fox News host, Pete Hegseth, as Defense Secretary, his nomination for Secretary of Defense. Okay, plenty of people are Fox News hosts. These guys are, they're often very intelligent. They're, conservatives. They're Trump loyalists. All makes perfect sense. He's a military man. He's got a strong background serving in the US Army. So where's the controversy? Well, the thing about Pete Hegseth is that when he was a member of the Home Guard and appointed to attend Joe Biden's inauguration as part of the grand ceremony, that great democratic institution that used to be the United States, when he was actually put down to do this and he was all set to do it, someone raised on Twitter that he could be an internal threat, a security threat, because they saw a cross symbol that he had tattooed on him and they thought, oh, that's a white supremacist symbol. Oh, it's a crusader symbol. Oh, maybe the guy's just a Christian. Basically just what they call a Jerusalem cross. You go to Jerusalem, they're everywhere, hence in the name. So he is actually accused of being or flagged as being a potential internal threat, a threat against the presidency. And this is who Donald Trump has made Secretary of Defense, the person in charge of the defense of the United States of America. Amazing, right? So everyone goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Then he has Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or as Caroline Kennedy, the US ambassador to Australia at the moment, calls him, Cousin Barbie. And of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a vaccine skeptic, an anti-vax crusader. He doesn't like fluoride in the water either. He's also a bit of a good old-fashioned health nut. He's a bit of a hippie. He doesn't like additives and processed food and stuff like that. He's worried about what's in the drinking water, all that PFAS or whatever. He's all over that. He's Googling that. And he's filed all these lawsuits. He doesn't like big pharma, big pharmaceutical companies. Maybe he's got some good points. One other thing about Bobby Kennedy, though, RFK Jr., he said in a New York Times article recently that a worm ate part of his brain and then died and was indeed laid to rest, or I suppose laid itself to rest inside his brain. Sort of apropos of nothing. Now, is that the sort of person you want in charge of your health department? Oh, maybe, maybe not. He wants to drain the swamp? Okay. This guy with a brain part eaten by a worm that is sadly now passed and therefore unable to give us its side of the story. This unfairly maligned parasite. Anyway, point B. So everyone goes, oh my God, it's RFK, it's RFK. So everyone's losing their minds about that. So what does Donald Trump do? The rule of three, the punchline. He nominates a congressman called Matt Gaetz, a guy who is just so out there that even the Republicans hate him. And he nominates this guy for Attorney General. Now, Matt Gaetz's main claim to fame, vis-a-vis the law, is that he's been accused of trafficking a minor across state lines for sexual purposes. And these allegations have come forward. There's more people who have come forward since and said that he, brought these women to New York to have sex with him and blah, 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 blah. So this is a guy whose most famous interaction with the law is as an alleged sex trafficker. That is his previous engagement with the Justice Department. And what does Donald Trump do? He makes him head of the Justice Department. Now, again, this is just amazing stuff. Just strap yourself in, sit back and enjoy the show. But what happened when he appointed Matt Gaetz? Well, this time, even the Republicans lost their minds. Everyone is just going absolutely crazy, saying this is insane. The Senate will never pass it. This will never get up. This cannot be let to stand. This time you've gone too far. How many times have you heard that sort of said or thought about Donald Trump? Oh, Donald, when you just said grab him by the okay, that's fine. But now you've gone too far. And yet he just keeps going further, further and further and further until it just becomes the new normal. He creates the world around him. And so Matt Gaetz is now at the center of this giant maelstrom and everyone is just going absolutely bonkers about that. And suddenly Bobby Kennedy Jr. doesn't seem so bad. Suddenly Pete Hegseth, who's also accused of paying off someone who accused him of sexual assault, which he says he didn't do, but that's just a minor detail compared to what's going on with the AG. So again, Donald Trump is just creating all this noise, all this colour and movement. God knows what the rest of his appointments are going to be. And of course, if these three crazy people get knocked off, even if just Matt Gaetz gets knocked off, then he still gets his way with defence and health. And the other weird thing about RFK Jr., I've got to say, there's There's a photograph of him sitting with Trump and Elon Musk on Trump's plane eating McDonald's. The very food that he's campaigning against. Trump, we all know, loves Macca's, used to work there. And you've got RFK sitting next to him, hoeing into a Big Mac. Everyone thought this was pretty weird. But I learnt a tidbit from a certain podcast in the US that we'll get to. And the reason they're sitting around eating McDonald's is because McDonald's is one of the very few foods, the very few restaurants that the US president can go to and order a meal, and it doesn't have to be checked by the Secret Service. Because when they made that quarter pounder, they didn't know the president was going to order it. They don't know who's getting it. So it means it's not a poison risk. So it means you can just rock up to a McDonald's drive-through, order a quarter pounder, give it to the commander-in-chief, and you don't have to have the Secret Service, the guys with the sunnies and the black suits, the men in black sniffing around your Coke and fries. So there you go, a little fun fact for you. Point being, however, Trump is just sending everybody crazy. And indeed, it is so crazy, it just might work. In fact, it might even be working. Because what Donald Trump is doing is a form of actual realpolitik that was conjured up by the great Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon called madman diplomacy. So the idea is that you basically present yourself as so volatile, so unpredictable, so crazy, so prepared to do anything that everyone else around you just gives you everything you want. Or doesn't dare make any sudden moves, doesn't dare threaten you, doesn't dare escalate any situations because you're crazy. You could do anything. And this is what Kissinger and Nixon did during the Vietnam War to stop it from escalating into World War III, to stop the Soviet Union getting more involved or the communist China getting more involved and suddenly turning it into a much broader global conflict, or heaven forbid, a nuclear conflict, instead of just keeping it contained within sort of Indochina. And it worked. Vietnam wasn't exactly a roaring success, but it wasn't World War III. And it worked because the Soviets and the Chinese thought, God, this Nixon guy, he's nuts. And Kissinger's going around using the back channel saying, mate, I don't know if I can control him. He could do anything. And Trump is doing the exact same thing. And he's doing it to everybody. And again, it's hard to know whether he is doing it deliberately or it's just who he is, but he's doing it. And it's working. And this is what people around him are saying he could be good for, that this is what the world needs. Now, there are reports, and again, you never know because you never know what's propaganda, you never know what these regimes want you to think. But there are reports, for example, that Iran has held off another missile strike against Israel because they want to maybe do a deal with Donald Trump, see what he's actually going to do to respond. And of course, they know that Trump is all in on Israel, far more so than the previous Biden administration, which was a bit more equivocal, perhaps understandably. But Trump is just all in. And so Iran, to put it politely, is shitting itself and holding off on any further hostile action because, again, they don't know what Donald Trump's going to do. They don't know if he's just going to nuke them. And we see the exact same thing, for example, in the Ukraine. You can bet your bottom dollar that Vladimir Putin is looking for an exit strategy. His invasion has gone absolutely appallingly. It's a couple of years now. They're dug in. I think it's been 1,000 days, 3 years. Ukraine is now making inroads into Russian territory. Putin has been utterly humiliated because he's a strong man. He can't just stop for no reason. But maybe with Trump in the White House, that gives him the circuit breaker, gives him the excuse to say, oh, well, now Trump's here. He'll agree to some deal, take a couple of chunks out of the east of Ukraine and pretend it's a victory when everyone else knows it's not. And again, could just give him that cover because Trump brings the crazy. But most importantly, Trump has rattled China. And you would have seen in the news over the last few days all this controversy over the fact that China is telling other world leaders ahead of the G20 summit and APEC to be more like Anthony Alabanese. So we've got a great relationship with Anthony Alabanese. He's really sensible and good and supportive of us. Why can't you all be more like Albo, says the China Daily, which is just a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping. And that's all well and good. But of course, when you're getting praised for being a good leader by an evil dictatorship, that's not the best kind of 5-star Uber rating that the Australian Prime Minister wants. So everyone's saying, oh my God, well, if China is saying this about Albo, then he must be terrible. Never mind the fact that Albo's got nothing to do with that. This is just China trying to do a snow job on the rest of the world. And it is a blatantly transparent snow job. This is what happens when you have a one-party authoritarian state. The production values go way down. You're so used to having a population you can just tell black is white, tell them whatever you want them to believe, and they'll just believe it because you've censored everything else and there's no other facts out there for them to accept. But when this spills out into the rest of the world, it just looks a little bit ham-fisty. I don't know if anyone out there is a fan of North Korean cinema, but it's just, the character development just isn't quite there yet. And so this is what China says. So it says, look, here is nice, compliant, pretty boy Anthony Albanese. Why can't you all be like him? And of course, Albo's got nothing to do with that. That's just what they're trying to tell everyone Albo's like. In fact, Albo met with Xi Jinping at the G20 and apparently raised quite a few concerns about human rights and other issues, as well as cementing the trade bond. So sounds like Albo did pretty well. But this is what everyone is missing out on. By focusing on China's praise of Anthony Albanese, everyone is kind of forgetting about why they actually came out and said this. And the entire reason why China felt it had to do this, and it even says so in the China Daily itself, is because they don't know how to handle Donald Trump. They're saying, here's this new crazy guy who's come along. The world's not predictable anymore. We don't know what he's going to do. So can everyone else just try to fall into line? Because this guy could do anything. Again, madman diplomacy. And it's put China on the back foot. And that puts everyone else in the world in a greater strategic position. And there is absolutely nothing more anathema. You have to remember that the Chinese Communist Party, the government of Xi Jinping, everything it relies upon, this is a government that, controls its people. It controls the speech of its people and what they can hear, what they can say. This is a government that provides incentives for good social, compliant behaviour. This is a government that runs absolutely everything, that runs the media. This is a government that is completely reliant upon order, upon predictability, and on control. And suddenly in Donald Trump, you've got someone who's disordered, unpredictable, and they can't control him. And that is a triple threat to the Chinese government. Once again, the rule of three. And now, dear listeners, for some truly big news, we've cracked it. We've made it in America. The Real Story podcast has arrived in the United States of America, the greatest country of all, the home of freedom and democracy. We've made it. And thank you for being on this journey with me. You are part of a few, a very precious, select few. And we've done it. You would not believe what's happened. So I'm on Sky News. I'm chatting away, talking about, what's going on in this podcast, stuff that you get, no one else gets, including some of the info that I gave you just before. And I make what I thought was just an in-joke that is so in that basically only I get it. So which seems to be most of my jokes some of the time. So I plugged the podcast, and in doing so, I gave a bit of a wink and a nudge to a podcast in the US called No Agenda, which is Sarah Harris introduced me to it. There's these kind of gonzo guys. They're very funny. They're arch libertarians. They're pretty crazy about some stuff. But one of them, Adam Curry, is known as the Podfather. He basically kind of invented podcasting or something. He sort of made it sing, made it work. And then he's got this other computer nerd, a former chemist called John C. Dvorak. And they do this podcast and they tear apart the mainstream media and, how everyone's lying to them and everything's a conspiracy, and they go down all these rabbit holes. And it's quite entertaining, sometimes just completely out there. Anyway, so I make this tiny joke on Sky News where I'm talking about this and I say, download it wherever you get your podcasts. No agenda. You can hear that for yourself right now.
Download it now. No agenda.
See, I did say that. And of course, I'm just sitting there. No one else on the panel knows what on earth I'm talking about. And so imagine my surprise when Sarah Harris gives me a call and says, guess what? You're on the No Agenda podcast. They have just taken my line and made it one of their ISOs. This is one of their sound bites. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. They know who I am. These guys are. So anyway, this is what they did. They cut up the soundbite. John C. Dvorak cut up the soundbite. And this is how they presented me to the world.
Let's start with the bonus ISO, which is the ISO No Agenda one.
Okay.
Download it now. No agenda.
Where's that from?
Oh, where is it from?
Download it now. No agenda.
Oh,
it's from Lefties. It's one of the Australian things. Guy's bragging about his own podcast, and he says no agenda, as though he has no agenda, but he's not. Anyway.
Oh, that's no good.
It was muddy anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, just some guy from Australia bragging about his own podcast. But it was muddy anyway. And that is all we have time for this week. Thanks very much for your company. Don't forget to leave us a review or a rating if you haven't already. 5 stars, and I love this guy, I'll do anything he says, is the appropriate form of words. You can email us at therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au if you've got any questions you'd like answered, any topics you'd like us to dive into. You can, of course, follow me and slide into my DMs on Instagram at Joe_Hildebrand. That is my handle. It's the only social media platform I'm on because, quite frankly, I'm too handsome for all the rest. And, of course, you can catch my columns every Monday and Saturday in the various News Corp mastheads around the country. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next week.